Hey everybody, it's Mark from Circle of the Dark Mother. The presentation I'm going to do right now is a replay of the presentation that I'm giving at the Dark Market here in Columbus, Ohio. The title is Mesopotamian Witchcraft with the Goddess Lilith, or Lilitu, if you're going to use properly her Mesopotamian name. So first of all, who am I? If you've been following my channel, you already know I'm a consecrated bishop in the independent Gnostic tradition. I have a master's in theology. I'm a certified professional coach. I've studied Kabbalah and been a devotee to Lilith for over 20 years. And I'm the author of Embracing Lilith, Embodying Lilith, a Gnostic Kabbalah of Lilith, and the forthcoming Empowering Lilith, Fueling the Lilith Within. So let's talk a little bit about Mesopotamia. And before we discuss anything about Lilith, we have to discuss ancient Mesopotamian culture. The only other cultures that existed as early and as long were in China and Egypt, and also the Indus Valley civilization, which is in between what's now Afghanistan, Pakistan and India. But language-wise, Sumer is the first place to have writing. Indus Valley did have symbols, but we've not translated, and we don't know if it's actually writing. So the thing about Mesopotamia is the Stone Age culture goes back tens of thousands of years, but the Sumerian period starts just after 4500 BCE. And the interesting thing is the Sumerians come from somewhere else. There are other cultures in the area. One of the most notable being the Ubaid culture, which we don't know from writing, but we do know from their pottery and their statuary. But after the Ubaids, the Sumerians came in from somewhere else. We don't know where. They don't really say in their writing. One of the theories based on DNA is that they actually came from Indus Valley civilization. Others believe they came from the mountains that are east of Mesopotamia. But the Sumerian period, once the Sumerians come in, happened around 4500 BCE. And these Sumerians, they had a name for themselves, which we now use Sumerian, but they called themselves the black-headed people. And we don't know if that means their hair was black. We don't know if they used it as an epitaph of black-headed meaning something. We know from their imagery that they had dark skin, but were not totally black. They were more like Middle Eastern looking, at least from their imagery. Their writing begins in what's called cuneiform on clay tablets around 3400 BCE. There is before that some cuneiform writing in clay tablets that is basically pictographs, but it becomes very much a complex language around 3400 BCE. And it is the first written language we found. There could be written languages before this, but the problem is, of course, that if it was written on animal hide or parchment, it would have decayed. And this is why we have so much of their writing, is because the clay tablets have been preserved. Mesopotamia has several periods that use the same cuneiform writing, but different languages and cultures, although the cultures do build one on another. So most of the later cultures do keep a lot of the Sumerian beliefs and cultural paradigms. So it was also a center of vast trade, being on the Persian Gulf, and a complete melting pot of people. So there was a lot of trade and interaction, especially in later periods. The other reason we don't know where the Sumerians came from is because their language group is not related to any other known language. So it may be related to some language that existed pre-Sumerian, but we don't have any writing to represent it. So it is completely isolate and not like anything else. Around 2234 BCE, the Akkadians came in, and they came from the north, north of Sumer, invaded, and they speak a Semitic language called Akkadian. Their language is related to other Semitic languages like Hebrew and Arabic and Aramaic and so on. And They called their land the land of Sumer and Akkad. And it was the southern portion was Sumer, the northern portion was Akkad. They changed the language but kept the cuneiform writing. And they also used much of the deities, some with different names, but the same deities from Sumer. Then at 2025 BC, the Assyrians came in, and they were from even further north and a little bit east, and they spoke a Semitic language called Assyrian. They also kept a lot of the Sumerian and Akkadian gods. They kept a lot of the same culture, although the cuneiform now reflected Assyrian. They still called the lands of Sumer and Akkad. And this is the biggest empire in the area. It went all the way from into Turkey, what is now Turkey, all the way to the Persian Gulf, almost all the way over to what we would call now Israel and Jordan, and pretty far west, except for Persia and some other areas that were not owned by them. And this empire, existed for almost 2,000 years. It was a big empire and very well known in the world. In 612 BCE, the Neo-Babylonian era starts, and it's a return to using Semitic Akkadian instead of Assyrian. And this happens because one of the kings of Assyria dies. His kids couldn't really hold the throne, and it breaks up into a lot of city-states. Babylon is a city, and the country never called itself Babylon. It actually called itself Sumer and Akkad, just like the previous generations. But the Greeks saw the main city of Babylon and named everything Babylonian. That's how we get the name. They did return the language to Semitic Akkadian, but again, still using cuneiform. You can see by the chart on the left that this is one of the oldest cultures we know of. I took the Greco-Roman world to show what a difference there is. We have Sumerian culture starting at 4500 BCE, where Greece and Rome were still pretty much in a Stone Age culture. We have cuneiform writing as early as 3400 BCE. But we don't get to any major cultures in the Greco-Roman world until about 2500 BCE with the Minoans. And then we get to almost 1500 with the Mycenaeans and Mycenae. But the pre-Greek language, linear B writing, doesn't happen until about 1250 BCE. So we're talking about 2,000 years, a little over 2,000 years later than cuneiform. We believe the Trojan War took place right after linear B writing. The Greek Dark Ages occur, and then we get the Etruscans, we get Rome, the classical period of Greece, and the Hellenistic period, and then we get closer to the date of 0 BCE, and we get the emperors, and after we get into the CE, we get the Orphic hymns recorded, and the Roman Empire continues. Mesopotamia stays this cultural location that evolves and keeps the same deities and the same writing until around 500 BCE. And this is where Persia invades, wiping out the Mesopotamian culture and religion over time. The king, Cyrus of Persia, actually comes in and acts like he wants to take over as being the main ruler of this area, and says that he has been told to do so by Marduk, who was their main deity at the time. He even goes so far as to go through the king-making process with the idol to Marduk. But as soon as he's accepted by the people, he pretty much gets rid of their culture, and Persian culture takes over. We do have to mention that the Jewish people were in exile in Babylon from 605 BCE to around 539 BCE. And this is because the Babylonian or Neo-Babylonian king at the time invaded Judah, which was the Jewish land at the time, and to take control, he and his people banished the Jewish rulers and priests into Babylon. So the Jewish people, the religious people, most of the higher religious people, were there for a good part of their life and then their kids' lives. So this means the Jewish culture picked up a lot of things from Babylon, demonizing much of it, but picking up other things. We know that the ritual oil practices used by the Jewish people that are represented in the Torah, or the Old Testament, as Christians would call it, follow the patterns of what's done in Mesopotamia. We also know the Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, that talks about a beautiful woman who is black and comely, actually is taken from some of the hymns to Ishtar. So there's a lot of spillover between the two cultures, and we'll see why that's important in a little bit. So Mesopotamian magic. The cultures of Mesopotamia practiced magic as part of their day-to-day culture. Literature and archaeologic evidence shows that they used fire, astrology, crystals and stones, oils, herbs, incense, and many other items that we also see in the magic of other cultures, and we even use today. Each city had its own set of deities that were thought to be the protectors of the city. In addition, there were hundreds of other gods and goddesses that were worshipped by individuals or used for specific magic practices. Most of what we know about Mesopotamian magic was found in the form of incantations written in cuneiform. Now, a lot of the cuneiform is actually things like lists of shipping manifests and lists of kings. We also have a gods list. And there are, of course, myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh. But when it comes to magic, other than inferences, it's mostly incantations, which were used for magic, exorcism, and to call on deities. Scholars have found, as I mentioned, that many of the practices we see in what we call the Old Testament were begun in Mesopotamia and then adopted into Judaism during the Babylonian exile, such as oils, the Psalms, the Song of Solomon, etc. And we even see some of the deities of Mesopotamia being brought over into Judaism. Many of them turned into demonic entities. And that's true of entities like Lilith, also like Pazuzu, who was a pestilence deity in Mesopotamia, and many others. In the case of Lilith, there is a goddess, Lilitu. Some will say she's not a goddess, but I have a video that explains why she was, because she's in the Mesopotamian god list. But when they brought her over, they combined her with several other female deities, most notably the pretty dark goddess Lamashtu. And the whole thing about killing babies and hurting pregnant women, that all comes from Lamashtu and not the original Lilitu. But they brought her name in, converted it to Judaic language, into Hebrew, calling her Lilith. And then they brought a lot of these attributes of the other goddesses into her mythology. So there's also a practice in Mesopotamia called the Ladder of Lights. And this seems to have originated in Sumeria, but gets pretty well developed in Babylon. All of Mesopotamian culture was very aware of the night sky and the heavenly bodies that inhabit it. They were skilled astronomers and astrologers. One of their primary practices that merged astronomy and their spirituality was called the Ladder of Lights. It has 8 spheres: Earth, Moon, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The Ladder of Lights was later adopted by the Jewish people by combining it with their earlier Merkava mysticism, throne chariot mysticism, to produce what we now call Kabbalah. The Ladder of Lights, in fact, looks a lot like Kabbalah. if you've ever seen the Tree of Life, which has 10 spheres, 10 main spheres, and then the non-sphere Dayat, in the Ladder of Lights, we have the same 7 lower, and then we have 1 supernal instead of the 3 plus Dayat. So it is very similar and is obviously proto-Kabbalah. The spheres in the Ladder of Lights are also aspects of deity and a bridge to higher consciousness. Magic practitioners. So in Akkadian, there are several words associated with magic workers. The word for an official priest or priestess was kalu, and that would be the temple priests and priestesses. These would be the official state sanctioned. But there was an unofficial group of magic users, which would be like we'd call witches, which were called kasaptu for female and kasapu for male. Sometimes in the mythology, kasaptu and kasapu were considered good and at times evil. This is typical of many religions that at times demonize those outside of the religious hierarchy. So as there was more power given to the kalu, the kasaptu and the kasapu became demonized and became, figures of evil, which anyone who practices paganism, occult practice, knows how that happens. So really, I would consider most people that are going to work in Sumerian or Mesopotamian magic are not going to be Kalu, because we don't have official priests or priestesses anymore. We would be Kasaptu or Kasapu. So Lilitu. Lilitu is a goddess in ancient Sumeria, which would be Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon, which is all of Mesopotamia, who is associated with wind, night, and sexuality. Lilitu is both a goddess and a demon. Gods and goddesses are descended from the primordial pair of deities, but demons are any god or spirit who doesn't follow the rules. So Lilitu is descended from this pair of deities, but she's also a demon because she doesn't follow the rules, like some of her counterparts. The name Lilitu appears in the Sumerian Assyrian god list. This in the language was called An Danoum and An Anu Sa Ameli. And that is translated into English because obviously they use cuneiform. So those are our letters to make it work so we can pronounce it. Only entities considered gods or goddesses are in this list. So if they're not a deity, they're not in the list, and Lilitu is. In the Sumerian portion of the god list, she is named Dim-mi-gi. Dim-mi is the prefix for deity. Not all of them have that, but there are some that do. And in fact, the word for god, goddess, or either has the root of Dim-mi. Lamashtu, who we mentioned, it was a pretty dark entity. She was just named Dim-mi. And it's sort of this idea that she's descended from deity, but she's missing something. And as I said, she was very dark and destructive. The Assyrian name is Lilitu. So Dim-mi-gi is also the Assyrian Lilitu. Dim-mi-gi loosely means deity of the night. And there are several deities that appear later after Sumer, so in Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon, who can be associated with Lilith because their attributes are similar. Some of them are considered handmaidens of Inanna, or the later name Ishtar, and there are texts that talk about Lilitu being her handmaid. So the question is if she's her handmaiden, is she her sister? Is she her daughter? Or is she her niece? We see this from the standpoint of her iconography is very similar to Inanna and Ereshkigal, who's Inanna's sister. And being a handmaiden, we just don't know. She could, be any of those because they don't list her parents. And that's true of a lot of the deities. We only know a few of their parentage, mostly the most well-known ones, the ones who were, that looked over a city, which Lilitu was not the goddess of a city, but a goddess used in magic, and a goddess that was obviously in the Sumerian Assyrian god list and later picked up by the Jewish people. So beyond Mesopotamia, Mesopotamia being located centrally at the Persian Gulf conducted trade and cultural exchange with a lot of other civilizations over its history. With these exchanges, Lilitu makes her way into many other cultures. We see her in Canaanite religion. We see her in Anatolia, which is now Turkey. We see her later even being picked up in Greco-Roman culture. And Egypt, there are ties to her as well. So the most notable migration of Lilitu is into Jewish religion and spirituality as Lilith. And as we know, Babylon invaded Judah, taking many of the spiritual and political leaders into exile. During this period, Lilitu was renamed Lilith and demonized, later being named Adam's first wife. The attributes of several Mesopotamian gods or goddesses and demons were then synchronized into Lilith, as I said, like Lamashtu, to give her all of these sort of dark attributes. So we talked about the ladder of lights, and with that, there are 8 rungs to this ladder. The first one representing Earth. And as I go through these are not, there's a bunch of things that are being mentioned here. Now, you don't have to do all this on the same day. You can use any of these if you want to work with Earth element. But there are some things that are mostly, pretty good to associate. So first of all, the color for Earth is usually either multicolored or earth tones. The incense or plant is Dittany of Crete, lily, carnation, ivy, and narcissus. The stones are garnet and moonstone, and the focus for this rung is sexuality. In addition to Lilitu, I have an alternate aspect whose Akkadian name is Kalili, and her name means the woman in the window. This goddess was said to be a handmaiden of Inanna, and she appears in Inanna or Ishtar temples as a wall hanging with a woman looking through a window. And she's associated with sexuality, sacred prostitution, which is not the way Western prostitution works, and also usually associated with helping women in childbirth. The optimum timing is for a day of the week is Friday. Now you can use the earth element any day, but Friday is the most powerful. And there is also what we would call a Sabbat during the Mesopotamian month of Kanun, which would be around the winter solstice. And this is a good time to do rung 1 for Earth. And the example method would be a candle magic ritual. And I have a video on candle magic, but basically you can take a candle, you can cut words into it, or if it's in a glass container, you can tape a picture to it and, do a ritual, dedicate it to Lilitu, or if you want to use Kalili, and do candle magic for sexuality, attraction, fertility, and things like that. Rung 2 of the Ladder of Lights is the moon. The color is purple. The incense plant is jasmine, comfrey, camphor, and the aloes, different kinds of aloe. The stone is rhodonite, and the focus is dreams. The alternate aspect that can be used in Sumerian is Sikil Lilaki, and the Akkadian name being Lilaki. And the meaning of this name is the Maiden of Desolation. This is the name used in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So again, you can use Lilitu, but you can use also Lilaki as an option here. The optimum timing for this is the day of week is Monday. And this is to get dreams, prophecy through dreams, having lucid dreaming, things like that. The ritual that's most associated with this would be during the Mesopotamian month of Adar, and it would be around the 1st of February. The example method for this is crystal or stone magic. And the way to do that is to get a crystal or stones or a combination, look up their meanings, or if you already have an association, that's great. And then use those as part of your ritual to focus energy. Rung 3 of the Ladder of Lights is Mercury. The color orange. The incense or plant is storax, orchid, or peyote. The focus is prophecy. Some stones are iolite or labradite. An alternate aspect to Lilitu could be the Akkadian goddess Abdagigi, and the meaning of her name is she who sends messages of desire. So again, in line with the passion idea, but prophecy is a passionate thing. You have to have a passion to really work with it. So the optimum timing for the day of week is Wednesday. The Mesopotamian month is Nisan, and this is around the spring equinox. An example method for this might be scrying with a pendulum. You could, of course, use a crystal ball. You could use water, whatever way you do prophetic work. And you can do that, of course, in a ritual. And I do have videos on rituals in my YouTube channel, so you can go look for those if you want some ideas. Rung 4 of the Ladder of Lights is Venus. The color is green. The incense or plant is rose, laurel, or red sandalwood. The focus is love. The stone is rose quartz. The alternate aspect is the Sumerian Ki El Lilala. The Akkadian name is Ardet Lily, and the meaning of this is handmaiden of Lila. And Lila or Lila in Hebrew, which again is another Semitic language, just like Akkadian, means the handmaiden of night, with Lilith being associated with light in both cultures. So this Ardent Lily is the handmaiden of Lilith. So you could use Lilitu or you could use Ardent Lily. The optimum timing is Friday at dusk. And then the Mesopotamian month is Yar, around 5/1. A good method is a spell bottle. And so a spell bottle is where you take a bottle, you put a picture or some kind of note or writing of what you want to do, in this case, something with love. You then add an oil to it. For love, I would probably use pumpkin oil or something like that, very associated with divine feminine. But you could use other oils, look up the meanings and use it. I also put water from my altar in the spell bottle, so it's already been consecrated. And then I look up, in this case, it would be love herbs. So herbs that bring romance and love. And I would put those in the bottle, seal it up, put a little candle on top of it and light it. And as the candle burns down, it seals the candle or the bottle. And I do that in part of a ritual. That is something that you can use a spell bottle for anything. I'm just using it as an example for this love ritual with rung 4. Rung 5 is the sun. The color is gold and yellow. The incense or plant is frankincense, sunflower, acacia, buttercup, chicory, lovage, and marigold. The focus is abundance. The stones are lapis lazuli. And in addition to Lilitu, you could use the Akkadian Bariritu, whose meaning is dusk. The day of the week that is most associated with her is Sunday. And the Mesopotamian month is Tammuz, which is around the summer solstice. And a good example is a Lilith Communion ritual. I have an example of that in YouTube. And really what it is, it's like doing a communion that you would see in a Christian church or the Passover feast in Judaism, but it would be using Lilith as the focus, using bread and wine and bringing that together and bringing abundance from those elements and bringing Lilitu, or in this case, if you want to use Bariritu, as the deity who brings that abundance. Rung 6 is Mars. The color is red. The incense and plant is tobacco and cactus. The focus is protection. The stones are black tourmaline or obsidian. The alternate aspect is the Sumerian name Dimmi-A or Dimmi-A. The Akkadian name is Labasu. Now, don't confuse that with Lamashtu. This is a different deity. And Labasu's name means she who comes at night. Again, very associated with Lilith because Lilith is associated with the night. The optimum timing is Tuesdays, and the Mesopotamian month is Tabaka, around 8/1. And I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that one right because it's a complicated word in the Mesopotamian language. The example method I would use here is oil. And what I would do is I would take an oil that's either dedicated to Lilitu or Labasu, one that maybe is for protection. I would take a drop of it and I would consecrate yourself on your forehead, anoint yourself, and maybe your hands, and do a prayer of protection. And Lilitu is really good at that, and Labasu as an alternate. Rung 7 is Jupiter. The color is blue. The incense and plant is heliotrope, jasmine berries, morning glory, opium poppies, and blue water lily. The focus is health. The stones are citrine and carnelian. An alternate aspect to Lilitu is Belili. Now, there's two Belilis. There's Belili, who is Ishtar's sister-in-law, the sister of Tammuz, or there's also a Belili that is super ancient, and she's a goddess of the moon and the underworld. She's believed to be a pre-Sumerian deity because Ereshkigal comes and takes over her place later on in the Akkadian and Assyrian period. But Belili is this older deity who is, again, an underworld and moon goddess. The optimum timing is Thursday, and the Mesopotamian month is Tishrin, which would be around the fall equinox. An example method of magic for this is burning intentions and herbs in a cauldron. So take some intentions, so what you want for health, what it looks like to you, write it on a piece of paper, mix some herbs with it that have to do with healing, put it in a cauldron, and burn that as part of your ritual. Now, I do want to call out again, all of these example methods are just examples. You can actually use whatever you want for a ritual, and you can mix these up for different times. These are just ideas for these rituals. Again, the optimum timing doesn't mean you have to do it then. And, the other parameters are all optional, but these are some ideas. Rung 8, which is the supernal rung, is Saturn. The color is black. The incense and plant is myrrh and cypress. The focus is mysteries of life and death. The stone is onyx. The Sumerian name is Dimigi. The Assyrian name Lilitu. Now, again, I'm not giving you an alternate because this is definitely the reign of Lilitu perfectly. You could look into Belili for this as well, or Ereshkigal. But if you want to go pure Lilith, I think Lilitu's the best. The name meaning in Sumerian, Dimigi, means deity of night, and her name in Assyrian, Lilitu, means she who comes by wind or air. And the optimum timing for this is on a Saturday. The Mesopotamian month is Akitu, and that's around 1031 or 11:1. So around Samhain is when this occurs. And an example for this is a death ritual. And I've done many of these, sort of like a Day of the Dead kind of thing. In my groups, we've done things like taking somebody and covering them in a shroud and anointing them for death and taking them through a meditation. We've also done things like calling upon all the spirits that are trapped on this plane and helping them to move on. So some kind of death ritual is great for this rung 8, because it is the gate between life and what's next for us, whether that's reincarnation or whether it is some life in a higher realm. So Lilitu being the perfect goddess for that. So I do have an example of the communion with Lilith. I do have a full video on it, but I wanted to give this one because it's a little different than most of the others. I think people have done candle magic, they've done witches' bottles, but the communion might be a little bit different for you. So communion. Christians use communion as either a remembrance of Yeshua, that's his Aramaic name, but Jesus, and their beliefs about his resurrection, or they believe it as a sacrament where the wine and bread becomes his blood and body. In all cases, it is based on the story of the Last Supper. Even though the practice of using bread and wine as part of a spiritual ritual was popularized by Christianity, it is something that has been around from the beginning of humanity. or at least the beginning of human society. And we know a couple examples of this being in the Torah. Abraham and Sarah have this bread and wine ritual with this figure, Melchizedek. And it's actually when their names are changed from Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah. So they are transformed through this ritual of bread and wine. The same practice was common in Egypt and documented in Mesopotamia. In Egypt, it was used quite a bit around Akhenaten's reign when he brought the religion of the Aten. And this was practiced multiple times a day. Since Abraham was said to come from the city of Ur, which is in Mesopotamia, one of the oldest cities, it's likely that this is where he learned the practice, or where at least Judaism learned the practice. So the ritual: have a chalice of wine, or you can use grape juice or anything else, and a plate with bread. It can be gluten-free because some of us are gluten intolerant, and put it on a central altar. Say the following: Mother of darkness, Queen of night, Lady of sorrows, we call upon your holy name. Lilitu, dark mother god, void of all, we give all praise to you. Destroyer of husks, purifier of souls, we call upon your holy name. Bringer of chaos, we give all praise to you. Serpent woman, spider woman, owl woman, we call upon your name. Lilith, we give all praise to you. And of course, you could put Lilitu in here if you want to do this in a more Sumerian way, or any of her attributes. This one is just a straight up communion, but you could also add some things around abundance as part of this. It's naturally about abundance, but you could add even more. Hold the chalice in your left hand and the plate in your right, and go to each direction. In east, say, Lamed, we receive your holy emanation in the east, the womb of the dawn, and we pray to you, come. In the west, say, Yod, we receive your holy emanation in the west, the womb of twilight, and we pray to you, come. South, Lamed, we receive your holy emanation in the south, the womb of protection, and we pray to you, come. North, Yod, we receive your holy emanation in the north, the womb of wonder, and we pray to you, come. Center, Tav, in you we find completion. Our soul is liberated from duality, and we ascend to your heights and descend to your depths. We glorify your presence and power. Lilitu, Lilitu, Lilitu. That last part you can intone as I did. You can just speak it, or you can sing it. Now, the letters are in Hebrew, Lamed Yod, Tav, but those are also going to be very, very similar to the letters in all of the other Semitic languages. So Assyrian, Akkadian, and so on would have similar letters. So these are the ones that are most used because Hebrew is still a living language, but these others are not. So the rite. Anybody who's in attendance stands in a circle around the altar. You can do this by yourself, but in a group is good too. Say, we come before you, Queen of Shadow, to ask for your blessings and insight, to rain down on us. Ignite the fire in our soul so we may rise from our own ashes and join you in all realms, worlds, and universes. Bless the bread and wine by saying, Lilitu, we ask you to imbue these elements with your darkness and your fire. Break the bread into small pieces. This is your body of darkness. This is your blood of fire. As we partake, we join ourselves to your spirit and pledge ourselves to you. The person leading takes a piece of the bread, dips it into the wine, and eats it. The lead then picks up the goblet and plate and lets the next person take the bread, dip it in the wine, and partake. And then they hand that to them, and it goes all the way around the circle. When it gets back to the first person, you put it back down on the altar. And when everything is complete, everyone says, so it is spoken, so it is done. And that's it. That's the Mesopotamian witchcraft with Lilitu, the Ladder of Lights, and also a little bit about Lilith Communion. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.